as a good segue from talking about Bob's work and his contributions, especially through woodcut, multiple block, and thinking about that kind of concept of opacity and the concept of mixing processes and how one artist is not necessarily limited in working, say, a single medium like lithography or woodcut or intaglio. This print that we did at the workshop with Glen Baldridge is the next kind of evolution in thinking of that philosophy of Bob Blackburn's work of inclusiveness, the way things happen through collaboration. So this particular print, the artist is Glen Baldridge. It's entitled Here Come the Miracles. It, at first glance, is this unbelievably beautiful kind of pastel color range, and the text of okay and fine. It gives you this kind of calm aspect or a serene environment that you're working in. But conceptually for the artist,
don't get too comfortable.
Don't get too comfortable, that's right. You want to think of these as two abstracted fists, and these are like like knuckle tattoos, finger tattoos.
Right.
And this comes out of a tradition for political dissidents and Russian gulags of tattoos as a form of protest.
Right.
Everything is okay and fine so long as you maintain protest. And so this idea that it's the fist, it's the tattoos across the hand, and that's what's being as a form of protest, was an impetus for the print for the artist. And the color scheme was this beautiful sort of tapestry. So a lot of the political dissidents in these prisons were basically only warmed in the winter by woolen blankets that family members would smuggle in. And so you'd have these unbelievably beautiful woven fabrics that were being used by prisoners in horrible conditions. And so this is kind of that color scheme to reference that, and the striping being like bars. And so
that's the first time I'm
layer.
hearing that. Every choice is so thoughtful.
Exactly, and I think that's what we really talk about in printmaking. So because we have the ability to make more than one, all of the choices that you make mean more. In a sense, if you do a painting, someone buys it, they love it, they hang it in their home, maybe it's hung in a room that they're mostly using, say their bedroom. And so most of the visitors of their home never get to see the work. So maybe 50 people get to see it, the life of it hanging in that person's home. Now if you do a print, an edition of 30 or 40, that's 30 or 40 homes times 50 of individuals.
Exponentially increasing the
Exactly.
audience,
So it's that increasing the value of an artist's voice through multiplication or the multiple original that matters so much.
An impact. Potentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure that what it is that you're saying is exactly what you want heard, because it has the greatest potential to be heard.
Yeah.
And so for an artist like Glen, we have the option through proofing, because of the process in and of itself, to test color, to test ways of working, to experiment throughout the process to make sure we get it exactly how he wants. So we did lots of color testing, lots of variations. The print in and of itself, imagine a long, thin strip of wood. Each of these color bars is a separate piece of wood. So it's
64 blocks.
Exactly, it's kind of crazy. So, and they're all wiped like you would an etching. So we raised the grain. So we used a wire brush to raise the grain, the higher parts of the grain and lower. So the recesses in the wood we wiped like you would an etching, and then we rolled the secondary color.
The grain
on
is
top.
the intaglio holding the ink in the recessed area.
And so all of this two-tone kind of quality to all of these is because it's been wiped and then rolled, and then they're all locked together.
In a different color.
In a different color.
Right.
So like in this case, it's the pink and the green.
Yeah.
And so we had a pattern, we had a format, so we have to create basically a jig, and everything is labeled, so we know what colors to wipe everything and what order to put everything back down in. And then everything is passed through the press. So it sounds simple enough, but there was about a 60% loss rate due to the fact that these are all individual boards, and maybe you get a crease out of the piece of paper because the paper starts to get down inside one of the little cracks and things like that. And so one of the aesthetic decisions we had to make was how much of a white edge you
this
would
little
want
halo.
to show. And so we actually, originally it was made perfect. There was no white edge, but it was so tight that it didn't read as that kind of woven tapestry.
Sure.
So we had to actually go back in and sand some of the edges to create some of those white gaps.
To put that air
to
in
get
there.
that volume.
Yeah.
Right, because otherwise it was kind of too perfect.
Yeah.
You know, so we needed a little bit more hand.
What about the font choice?
The font choice is an Old English script font, which was the font of choice of the protest tattoos.
Okay.
The Russian protest
So
tattoos. And so
authenticity.
that was exactly. He's sticking to it, and the color scheme is directly from those tapestries. And he really likes the kind of reference to modernist American minimalist art, so like a kind of a play on Donald Judd. Donald Judd was famous for his unbelievably difficult woodcuts. And apparently we've maintained that with these.
I think of this as being a kind of hallmark of a lot of your work, at least that is here in the library's collection, is this very fluent, sort of effortless looking result that's arrived at in a Byzantine, just impossibly complicated way, and this is something that you do brilliantly. This is a great example.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
But it can also be more simple. I mean, nothing here is simple on the table, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my philosophy as a printer really goes back to Bob Blackburn's, which is appropriate process for the appropriate outcome.
Right.
And because of a lot of the work of Bob Blackburn and other printers over time before me.
This message required that language,
but we had the tools in the toolbox.
Right.
So printmaking is an additive technology. So we don't dump the tools out of our toolbox in favor of the latest technology.
Sure.
We just add the latest technology and our box just gets bigger.
And it starts with the idea, you said.
And it always starts backwards from the idea. So when we think about Bob's approach being you're creating your own world, the conversation that I had with Glen about this particular print was him talking about the idea behind it and wanting to be able to show the wood grain but not necessarily sure how to get it to look the best. Asking, what is possible? What would be the best way to come up with this sort of feeling? And so we started talking about processes, and we started talking about things that he was personally responding to material-wise, and we worked backwards from this idea to arrive at this particular image.
Right.
And so that's where we always start. So for me, it's about what do you want this to do and how do you want this to feel?
Right.
And then we start choosing the appropriate processes for the appropriate outcomes. So sometimes they get unbelievably complicated to make, but the goal is that you don't see any of these works as prints first. And this is another carryover from Bob too. It's that it's a work of art first that happens to be a print. So for me, when you approach the work, the first thing you say is like, oh, this is a woodcut, then I've kind of failed as a printer. I failed my artist. So if the first thing you say is like, wow, this is amazing.
That isn't the primary point.
It's not the primary point. It's not that it's unimportant, but it's what we want is people to respond to the work as the work itself first.
Right.
And then it becomes a supporting
visually,
detail.
Message, aesthetic.
Exactly. So if you think about Bob Blackburn's painterly prints,
response.
Exactly, like faux pas, if you look at that particular image, it's this gut emotional response. The first thing you think of is not printmaking.
Right.
First thing you think of is the work that's in front of you.
Right.
And I think that's really what I tried as the director of Bob's workshop, to continue that philosophy and to help other artists feel comfortable doing that as well. So that you're not making prints, you're making works of art that happen to be prints.
Right.
And some people say that as a printer, they're like, isn't that sacrilegious? And I say, no, my job is to help an artist achieve their vision through the medium. And their vision is not the medium.
Right.
Their vision is something else. And to really be able to think about your audience in terms of, well, how is my work going to get into my audience's hands? How do I want them to experience that work? What do I want it to do for them over time? And so that's why when you think of the work that was produced in the workshop under Bob's tenure and the work that was produced under my stewardship of his workshop, it's always about art
9
first.
years.
Yeah, it's about a little over 9 years. I was the director of the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop, which is still going. It's a program of the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts.
Right.
They were the organization that came in to help Bob when his workshop had closed in 2001, to help him close his workshop and reopen a new workshop in his own name. So what happened is the printmaking workshop ceased to exist as a legal entity in 2001 due to finances. Right. And so the Elizabeth Foundation, who Will Barnett was on their board, basically said to Bob, what we can do is open a new program of our foundation. You will be our artistic director to continue the legacy of your work. And that was what had happened, and Bob created the charter that he wanted the workshop. And had Bob still been alive in 2006 when I came, Bob would have been my advisor on the way in which I ran the workshop. And so the way in which I set up the function of the workshop was directly a carrying on of Bob's tradition and Bob's wishes. And so a lot of people talk to me about that. They're like, oh, the workshop it's so crazy because it serves about 8,500 people a year through a 4,000 square foot space in the middle of Manhattan. And
that's carrying on the tradition.
It's carrying on the tradition. So for me, everything was about how can we get printmaking in the hands of the greatest number of artists from the greatest diversity of backgrounds and perspectives. So age ranges, we had artists working who were 19 years old to 85 years old, or even when MF Hussein was in the studio, he was 96. So when you think about that, and also not just the most professional artists, so artists who are either dabbling, artists who are working on building a career, working towards that concept of professionalism, artists who are students, and artists who are at the top of the professional food chain of the art world, so to speak. So the idea is that
all in the room
no
together,
separation.
shoulder to shoulder.
Exactly. And Bob really felt that one of the ways in which people had been discriminated against or their work had not been supported was requiring certain types of educational requirements to use the studio.
Sure.
And so some studios will say, well, you have to take a certain number of classes before you can use the studio. Bob always felt that that discriminated against individuals being able to have access. It was a form of or a possible way of doing that, and that it could discourage people from being as creatively free. So, in keeping true to tradition, anyone from anywhere can walk in the door and start working on prints in the workshop. And that's how stuff like this gets to be made. And so my reasoning for coming to the workshop was I was a master printer for Universal Limited Art Editions before coming to the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop, just as Bob had done years ago. And my focus was to bring the most current private print shop professional technical information to the widest audience possible.
Right.
So what I was doing with our publishing platform at the Robert Blackburn Printmaking Workshop was helping to push the technical gamut of printmaking in the same space that any others would be working, so they get to actually learn how that's made too. Because a lot of individual printmakers who are making their own artwork in print without the collaboration of a printer, it can be very difficult to have access to all of that knowledge. Mm-hmm. So I've spent my life and career amassing this type of knowledge, and it does no good if it just stays in my brain.
Right.
And it does some good when I work with artists, but it does better good when you work in a way that exposes that information to others so that they can take bits and pieces of any print being made and apply it to their own work.
This is really getting to the heart of your way of being a master printer and also connecting with the history and Bob's legacy.
So those of us within the field as collaborating master printers, our responsibility is to our artists and the art first.
Right.
And our secondary responsibility is the maintenance and continuation of the field, making sure it's possible for other artists, printmakers, and printers to have access to the information to continue the tradition. In a way, you can kind of think of it as maintaining the tools in the toolbox, making sure they stay sharp and they're well oiled so that the next person who gets the toolbox can use the tools. And that's really a lot of what we think about. And so when you think about a print
highly
like
democratic art
very
form,
much so.
Historically and still.
Exactly. And we feel that as printers, that we understand that we're part of a longer line and a longer tradition, and we have a responsibility because it is about disseminating information, the form of print, that we have a responsibility to make sure that we are doing it in a way that is perpetuating the field and maintaining access. So that is something that we feel as collaborating master printers, which directly comes from Bob Blackburn's philosophy.
Marvelous. You mentioned international, and we're standing close to work that I love by Colombian artists from Medellin.
Yes.
José
Antonio Suárez Londoño is the artist, and he is very well known for his drawing practice as well as his intaglio practice. So he has this kind of process where he'll get up in the morning and he'll have his coffee and his tea and his juice and read the paper and work on a plate. And then the next day he'll go into the printmaking studio, he'll etch it and he'll print it. And if he likes it, he'll print 2 or 3. If he doesn't like it, he'll work on it. If he can't get the print by the end of the day, it's tossed. And then, so that's like 2 days within his working week. So printmaking was a very regular practice for him. And so, but he always only worked in black and white and very straightforward intaglio techniques. Mm-hmm. So when he came into the workshop, he gave a wonderful talk to members, and he showed out the prints that he'd been working on for years. And this is at a time that the Museum of Modern Art was in the process of purchasing over 200 of his etchings.
Yes, yeah,
and
great
so,
collection there.
Very beautiful collection of work. So when he came into the studio, there was no point for me to do a straightforward black and white etching with him because that's what he does on his own. And so I talked to him about working on a print with things that maybe combine some of the visual elements of his drawings and his small paintings, mm-hmm. a way of thinking about his prints in a different form, mm-hmm. which involved doing chincolet and multiple plates with different colors. So we made a graphite ink for him so he could get this sort of softer, more pencil drawing feel. We printed in one plate, and then we printed another plate with a like kind of a rust red. And this is more of an homage to Posada. He really kind of wanted, he was thinking about it in those sorts of terms, José Guadalupe Posada. And then using Chincolet as a means of, and so the Chincolet elements are these pieces of paper here. And so they're small shaped pieces that get glued in at the same time of printing.
Right.
And those were really to act as structural visual elements to help open the space a bit. And one of the great things to me about this print is that José is always working on things as they're happening.
He's living
in the moment. So this is this guy down here at the bottom of the image. This is when Suárez was first going around and that whole fear of things in the subway. So he's like literally on the subway drawing. He's like reading someone's paper across from him. And so all of these things are kind of coming out of a play.
Chelsea Hotel is here. You were talking about that earlier.
Exactly. So and there's also this kind of, he really fell in love as a young man with things like Leonardo's sketchbooks. And there's a lot of that kind of more on what we can say like Renaissance feel to the way in which he approaches drawing.
Yeah, it has this sort of old master feeling while being completely contemporary at the same time.
And that's really, I think, the best way to describe his work. And I think he would probably be very happy to just do that. So in contrast, when we think of José's work, which is kind of that old mastery feel, but is very contemporary, when you look at the print to the left here, Joseph Hart's work, he's a younger artist based in New York City, he lives in Brooklyn. It's the same techniques. Intaglio with Chincolet, and he's approaching it in a vastly different way.
It makes a great contrast with the Londoño.
Exactly, and so when you think about, because his really has that kind of play towards what we call modern masters, kind of that feel of, say, Miro, or even like a little kind of the remnants of, say, Jackson Pollock or de Kooning in the way in which his mark making is being done. And there's this kind of lightness as well as invitational quality. So both of these artists really liked the intimate scale as well, because it's more of a draw in, and they're actually wanting people to spend a little bit more time with the work. And they're both utilizing the techniques in ways that they would not do things.
Yeah,
in
you
their own
really
studio.
sort of have to come in, to
Exactly.
read it and
so
interact.
People in printmaking have really, there's the tradition of prints being intimate. That's something that you collect. You don't actually frame. That it's something that goes in flat file drawers and you pull and you enjoy them in the flesh, in person, versus something at distance.
Behind glass.
Behind glass. And then there's also contemporary printing where you can do things really huge. So artists today have to really make choices.
Sure.
And so for Joseph Hart, the intimate scale of this particular print, which is a composition in 2 points, was something that really drove him in the work, as well as this beautiful velvet black, which is an aqua tint.
So sort of light absorbing and light reflecting duality here that is very
And that's
alluring.
why, exactly, and the title composition in 2 points, it's really talking about
It takes
that.
you there, yeah.
And so for him, he's always trying to create a conversation within the work and a conversation of the viewer with the work.
Right.
So that you can kind of get lost within what it's having to say, but at the same time it has an invitational quality. And so that's something that's very important to him as an artist. And so our struggle with prints for him, when we're pushing and pulling about value range and color and things like that, is to maintain the internal dialogue within the work as well as the dialogue with the viewer. And the beautiful part about printmaking is that because you pull a proof between it every time you change, there's no subjectivity of memory relative to your decision-making process.
Right.
You can't say, if it's painting, I paint over this part, was it better before
You're tracking
or after?
the process.
In this case, we have a printed record of every change, and so you can say, oh, it was better before, or this is better now. And I think because there's a printed record, it allows artists to have greater freedom. Because they can say, well, I can make the change, and if I don't like it, I at least still have this one.
Right.
Right? So you have a backup. And so I think in a lot of ways it can reduce some of that creative stress that will cause an artist to be a little bit more conservative in their development. And so printmaking is a medium where a lot of artists feel the most free and will actually go to expand their work ahead of their primary practice. So the artist Carol Dunham, he's really famous for saying that his prints are about 4 years ahead of his paintings.
Yeah.
And it's because in his prints, it's paper. There's something about paper that it lightens people up. It makes you feel more free to think and experiment, and you can make changes in ways that are different. And it's that other aspect that we had talked about with you get to be the viewer of your own work. Because when it's flipped over and it's now shown to you, because you've had to work on it backwards, you're seeing it new for the first time, just like your audience. And so for a lot of artists, and I know that that's the case for Joe, that working in prints really helps you see your work in this other way, and it feeds your main studio practice.
Thinking in these different dimensions.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
And so it's wonderful to have this kind of contrast of something that's far more representational, far more abstract, and so you can see that the process in and of itself does not dictate the visual outcome. It's the artist's hand that does, and neither does the printer, especially if we talk about this print by David Ambrose, which is an etching as well. It's a combination of line etching, spit bite, drilled holes in the plate, so all of the white dots are drilled holes in the plate.
Looks very much like a sort of a map and a constellation, and if you look at the back of this print, which I won't attempt to do right now, you can really see the relief from the perforation.
Exactly. So what the idea is, the artist, he would pierce paper a lot. And so he kind of wanted to have a similar feel to that. But in this case, because you're piercing the plate, not the paper, that means you get the raised dot, which in a sense is kind of like Braille. So your analogy of a map is he really wanted the print to have that sort of tactile quality, almost a way of finding your way around. Yeah. Does that make sense? And it's based off of Charlemagne's Chapel, the composition.
Right.
So there's a lot of that sort of tactility that can come into printmaking. A lot of people think of prints as being very flat. As a printer, we think of printmaking as being sculpture, in the sense that, or a sculptural approach to making work, in the sense that sculptors are known for, you put things together, you take things apart, you put them back together in a different order. You can move the arm of the figure up, or you can take it off and move it down, or you can just cut it off completely. That's the approach to printmaking. We make different plates, you make changes to things move around. It has a different physical approach because you're working on physical matrices. It just so happens to have what I refer to as an extremely low relief output in the form of a two-dimensional print. And so occasionally you get prints that have a little bit higher relief, like this particular one that has that tactile quality. But in terms of prints with things like Chakaia, which is kind of a nice way to segue to
Speaking
the
of
Chakaia
sculptors.
Booker. Speaking of sculptors and tactility, this print by Chakaia Booker is a combination of woodcuts printed on different papers that are then Chakaia together, and which is different than collage. And I'll be very specific about making
I was
that
at your
distinction.
studio while you were working on this
one.
and I have images of the process with all the push.
Exactly. So what we would do for Chakaia Booker is she would carve wood blocks. We would print those in black ink or white ink on different papers, very thin Asian papers from Japan, Thailand, China, things like that. And some of them are handmade, some are machine made. And then we coat them with a water reconstitutable glue, methyl cellulose, and then give them back to her. And she would start cutting them out and finding the parts that she really liked and composing them in different ways, and she would hold them down with little push pins. Then what we would do is painstakingly take all the little push pins out, put a dampened sheet of paper over the top, we'd flip it over, put a dampened sheet of paper on the back that it's actually going to glue or collate
Fraught
to.
with danger, it
Fraught with
sounds
danger.
like.
Pass it through the press. And the reason I make a distinction of Chakaia versus collage is this. Collage is really about stacking pieces of paper, and it's more about coverage. So, and there's a opacity to collage that is not present in Chakaia. Chakaia, because of the nature of the process, the dampness of the paper and the wetness of the glue, it opens the fibers of the paper and actually pulls them into one another. So it's more about transparency.
And merging.
And it actually is becoming one piece of paper now.
Right.
Methyl cellulose is a common sizing for paper, of the production of the paper that this is actually adhered to. And so when you look at the image and you can start to see through to the layers below. If it were collage, you wouldn't have that same visibility. And so we actually pass this through the press, continue over and over and over until it reaches the transparency that Chakaia believes is the best. And she says, okay, this is where I want it. And that's when we'll stop.
Talk just briefly about what her sculptures are like. She's known as a sculptor.
Known as a sculptor, and what she's known most for within her sculptural process is cutting up and recombining tires.
Right.
So old discarded tires to brand new tires. So she'll cut them up into different parts and pieces and then recombine them into sculptures. And typically they're in the 40-foot long, 15-foot tall kind of scale, very public art scale. So when she came into the studio, she was not, let's just say, not into printmaking. And the reason is it felt too confining for her. So typically when you make a print, you make a mark and that's where it stays. So you transfer it to paper, but where you made the mark on the plate is where it stays within the image.
That's too confining.
It's too confining. Well, she said it was too static.
Yeah.
And she wanted to be able to liberate the marks, to have them be more dynamic. And so when you start to think of her woodcuts in relation to Bob Blackburn's woodcuts, how he was mixing and matching different parts and pieces, and use a block and turn it and rotate it, that's kind of the early step of where we then get to with Chakaia's work, which is saying just because it's printed on this spot doesn't mean it has to stay there. So she would cut it out of the print. We'd maybe print that element 4 or 5 or 6 times. So when you look at the dots around the border, those are printed several layers of different pieces of paper, so she could use that mark over and over and over. It allowed her to basically create like tire treads or patterns. And so she got to work in the same conceptual focus that she does with her sculptures in print.
The color is very different here.
And the color is very different. And the beautiful part about colors, her early work was very colorful. And a lot of people don't know that her early work was also textile based. And so for her, pattern and color is something that she's very known for. And it's something that for her, that's she as a person is very colorful and very pattern oriented in her dress. And so when she was working in the studio originally, this is back in 2009, she saw the artist M.F. Hussain working, who's a prominent artist from India, who is at the time, I believe, was 94 or 92 when he was working, when they were overlapping in the studio. And he was doing these beautiful lithographs with bright colored chine papers interjected into the images. And she struck up a conversation with him, and they were talking about their work and different approaches and things. And after he had left, he had gone to Dubai, where they were working on building a museum in his honor. She asked me, she said, "Is there any of that colored paper left?" And so that's how we started working on color, and it came back into her work. And so it's one of those...
That's such a printmaking workshop kind of story.
Exactly. That artists, and they're both very well-established, very well-known artists that are learning from one another. And I think you kind of can't describe or think of other situations where that happens to artists on a regular basis outside of environments like this. And they're so rare for artists, especially at their stature, to be able to have those types of experiences. And so for her, this composition, took, say, a month and a half to realize. This we actually ended up editioning solely because it was possible, because each element of it is printed. But we have to reverse engineer it, and this is a great illustration of creating a world versus recreating the world. So she had parts and pieces, big pieces of paper that she's cutting small pieces off, and ends up with this as the final image. So we have to work backwards from that to that edition. So we have to figure out what block it came from, what paper
Construct,
it was on.
deconstruct.
Exactly. And so it can take a couple of weeks to actually get it prepared to then start thinking about editioning. And so we've only ever editioned a few of her works because of the complicated nature of that. And at the same time, we're editioning because we want to make some of her work more affordable and more accessible, because the larger, unique pieces are much, much more expensive, and the sculptures are obviously even more expensive. And so this print was a way for her to allow people who really loved and supported her work, but either didn't have the space for a sculpture or didn't have the financial means to support her career at that level, but to be able to support her through print.
And to easily bring it into a public collection like ours.
Exactly, because one of her large sculptures would be this whole room.